Emily's heart froze the moment she saw him. The cafe was supposed to be her safe place, the one corner of the city where she could sip her latte, sketch in her notebook, and disappear from the world. But there he was, Daniel, her ex, tall and polished in his tailored suit, standing at the counter ordering his coffee with that easy smile she once fell for. Her chest tightened, memories she wished she had buried clawing back to the surface. She couldn't let him see her, not like this, casual sweater, messy bun, no shield of confidence. He'd take one look and know he still had the power to unravel her. Panic surged. Her eyes darted around the cafe, searching for an escape, and then she saw him, a man sitting alone at a corner table, absorbed in a book, his hand resting loosely on the rim of his cup. He looked composed, his presence commanding without trying, the kind of man who didn't need to draw attention to himself because the air seemed to bend toward him naturally. Desperation overruled caution. Without thinking, Emily walked straight to his table, leaned down, and wrapped her arms around his shoulders in a hug. The stranger stiffened for a second, startled, before his body relaxed. Slowly, he turned his head toward her, his voice smooth, low, and calm. "Well," he murmured just loud enough for her to hear, "this is a pleasant surprise." Emily's pulse hammered. She forced a smile, playing along. "I'm so glad you're here," she said, loud enough for Daniel to notice. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Daniel pause at the counter, his brows knitting as he glanced toward her. She clung tighter to the stranger, hoping the charade was convincing. The man closed his book and set it gently aside, slipping into the role as though he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. He angled his chair slightly, his arm brushing against her back in a protective gesture that felt too natural. "I missed you," he said smoothly, his eyes holding hers in a way that steadied her panic. For a moment, Emily forgot why she was even hugging him. His gaze was clear, unwavering, and unexpectedly kind, as though he could sense she needed saving and had decided to be her shield. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, muttered something to the barista, and turned sharply toward the door, his jaw tight. Within seconds, he was gone. Emily let out a shaky breath and released her hold. I'm so sorry," she stammered, backing away, her cheeks burning. I didn't know what else to do. My ex was here and I just." The man tilted his head, studying her. Instead of irritation, there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes, paired with a calm patience. "You're safe now," he said, his tone reassuring. Then, a faint smile tugged at his lips. "Though I have to admit, it's not every day a stranger greets me like that." Embarrassed beyond measure, Emily grabbed her bag, ready to bolt before she made things worse. "Thank you, really, I owe you," she mumbled, avoiding his gaze. She slipped out of the cafe, her heart still racing, never realizing she had just walked away from the man who would change her life forever. The next time Emily saw him, it was purely by accident. She was rushing across the city square, balancing a stack of folders from the nonprofit office where she worked. A gust of wind caught the top pages, sending them flying in every direction like startled birds. She groaned, already imagining the hours it would take to reorganize, when a steady hand appeared, catching a runaway sheet midair with practiced ease. "Careful," a deep, familiar voice said. Emily froze. She turned, and there he was, the stranger from the cafe. He stood tall in a crisp navy shirt, sleeves rolled up, moving with the same quiet assurance she remembered. In one hand, he held several of her pages, perfectly aligned, in the other, a sleek leather briefcase. The contrast between his elegance and her flustered state couldn't have been starker. "You again," Emily blurted before she could stop herself. Her cheeks warmed, a small smile curved at his lips. "I'm starting to think you're following me." Emily laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair from her face as she scrambled after the rest of her papers. "If I were, I'd probably do it with less clumsiness." He bent to help, collecting the scattered sheets with surprising care, stacking them neatly before handing them back to her. "Emily, right," she blinked. "How? You mentioned your name at the cafe when you were improvising." His eyes glimmered with quiet amusement. "I'm Alexander." Something about the way he said it, simple, unpretentious, put her at ease. She nodded. "Well, Alexander, thanks for rescuing me." Again, he tilted his head. "You seem to get into situations that require rescuing." "Trust me, this isn't normal," she replied, though she wasn't sure if that was true anymore. Something about him made her world tilt off its usual axis. They walked side by side across the square, and Emily was aware of how people's gazes lingered on him. He carried himself with the kind of natural authority she couldn't quite define, like someone used to being in control, but without arrogance. She clutched her papers tighter, determined not to seem out of place. "So," Alexander said, breaking the silence, "what kind of work sends you running around with an office in your arms?" Emily smiled despite herself. "I work for a youth program. We organize workshops, mentorships, that sort of thing. The paperwork never ends." "That sounds meaningful," he said softly, as though he respected it. Too many people dismissed her job as idealistic, but his tone held no mockery, only curiosity. She glanced at him, wondering why he seemed so different from other men she'd met. "And you, what do you do?" For a fraction of a second, his expression shifted, subtle, almost unreadable. Then he shrugged lightly. "Business. Meetings. The usual boring stuff." She didn't push. After all, he'd already done more for her than any stranger was obliged to. As they reached the corner, her bus screeched to a stop. She hesitated, then smiled. "Well, thanks for the save, again. Maybe next time, I'll rescue you from something." Alexander's eyes lingered on her, thoughtful, as though he wasn't used to people offering to give back. "I'll hold you to that," he said quietly. Emily climbed onto the bus, clutching her papers, her heart inexplicably lighter. She told herself it was just coincidence, just luck. But deep down, a small voice whispered that fate wasn't finished with Alexander yet. Emily hadn't expected to see Alexander again so soon, but fate seemed intent on weaving him into her days. The third encounter happened at the city park during a weekend fundraiser her nonprofit had organized. She had been on her feet since dawn, stringing banners, arranging booths, and guiding volunteers until her throat was hoarse. By noon, the crowd had swelled, families, donors, and curious onlookers filled the lawn. Emily was rushing between stations with a clipboard when she nearly collided with someone standing near the refreshment table. "Careful," came that now familiar voice. Her head snapped up, and there he was, Alexander, dressed in a simple charcoal jacket over a crisp white shirt. He looked effortless, even in the casual chaos of the park. Emily blinked, stunned. I could say the same," he replied smoothly, glancing around. "Seems you're always at the center of some storm." "This is my storm," Emily said with a small laugh, holding up her clipboard. "We're raising money for youth mentorship programs. It's a big day." Alexander's gaze softened, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. "You planned all this?" "With a team," she corrected quickly, feeling a flush of pride despite herself. "We've been working for months." He studied her for a moment, then asked, "How can I help?" The question caught her off guard. Most people his type, sharp suit, commanding presence, were quick to enjoy the event, slow to roll up their sleeves. Yet Alexander looked utterly serious. "You don't have to," she began. "But I want to," he cut in gently. So she put him to work. To her surprise, he carried crates of bottled water with ease, set up chairs, and even knelt to tie balloons for a group of giggling children. The sight made Emily pause more than once. He didn't act like a man trying to impress, he acted like someone who had nothing to prove. Throughout the afternoon, she found herself drawn to him. When she spoke to donors, Alexander lingered nearby, his quiet presence strangely reassuring. When she struggled to juggle her papers and phone, he wordlessly held one for her. It was as if he anticipated her needs before she voiced them. At one point, she asked, half teasing, "So, Mr. Business Meetings, are you sure this isn't beneath you?" Alexander gave her a look that was both amused and serious. "Helping people? Never." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her, in the best way. As the sun dipped lower, the fundraiser wrapped up successfully, donations surpassing their goal. Emily, exhausted but glowing with relief, stood watching the volunteers pack up. Alexander approached, his jacket slung casually over his arm. "You're remarkable, he said quietly. Emily blinked, taken aback. Compliments usually made her shrink, but something in his tone wasn't flattery. It was sincere. She forced a light laugh. "I think that's the exhaustion talking." He smiled, but his gaze lingered, thoughtful, almost protective. For a moment, Emily wondered who he really was. There was something about the way people seemed to part for him in the crowd, the respect in the air that followed him naturally. But before she could ask, he checked his watch and excused himself, promising they'd see each other again. As she watched him leave, a strange mix of curiosity and warmth spread through her chest. She didn't know it yet, but the truth about Alexander was already beginning to unravel, and it would change everything. Emily thought the fundraiser would be the last time she saw Alexander for a while, but only a week later, her world tilted again. She was setting up a display of youth artwork at the community center when she heard laughter behind her, a familiar, grating sound that made her stomach clench. Daniel, her ex, strolled in, immaculate as always, flanked by two colleagues. His eyes immediately locked on her, and that smug smile she remembered too well spread across his face. "Emily," he drawled, as if her name were a joke. "Still playing charity games, I see." She bit her tongue, refusing to let him rattle her. "We're building something that matters," she said evenly, arranging the last painting. "Not that you'd understand." Before Daniel could reply, the room stirred. The air seemed to shift, voices lowering, as if someone important had entered. Emily turned, and her breath caught. Alexander walked in. He wasn't in his usual understated attire. Today, he wore a tailored suit that seemed to sharpen every line of his presence. His stride was confident, his expression calm but commanding. People immediately recognized him, she could see it in their eyes, the sudden hush of respect, even awe. Daniel's smirk faltered. "What the?" Alexander's gaze swept the room, landing on Emily. A flicker of warmth softened his features before his mask of composure returned. He greeted the organizers with polite handshakes, his voice low and steady, and Emily watched as everyone leaned in, eager for his approval. Whispers swirled around her. "That's Alexander Grant, the billionaire investor, the youngest CEO in the city's history." Emily's heart thudded. Billionaire, investor, CEO, the man who had carried crates of water and tied balloons for children. The man she'd hugged in a cafe, thinking he was just another stranger. Daniel, recovering from his shock, seized the moment with venom. He leaned closer, his voice a cruel whisper only she could hear. "Of course, now it makes sense. A nobody like you wouldn't get his attention otherwise. He's slumming, Emily. Don't fool yourself." The words sliced deep, reopening old insecurities. She looked at Alexander, at the ease with which he commanded the room, the way others deferred to him, and doubt churned in her chest. Was Daniel right? Had Alexander only been entertaining himself with her? When Alexander finally approached, she forced a brittle smile. "So, you're not exactly just a guy who goes to cafes." His eyes searched hers, a flicker of regret there. "I wanted you to know me before you knew this." "That's convenient," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. "Because now I don't know if anything was real." Hurt flashed across his face, but he didn't push. "Emily." She shook her head, stepping back. The room suddenly felt too small, the whispers too loud. She couldn't breathe under the weight of it all. Without another word, she gathered her things and walked out, ignoring Daniel's smug expression and Alexander's quiet call after her. Outside, the cool evening air hit her, but it did nothing to steady the storm inside. She had wanted honesty, something real. Instead, she'd fallen for a man who had been hiding the truth all along. And she wasn't sure her heart could forgive it.